This episode is sponsored by Flywheel. Look, marketing firms are expensive. Luckily for your business, you've got Flywheel, a DIY marketing community that gives you all of the support, resources, and direction you'll ever need at a fraction of the price of an agency.
All we're asking for is equity. All Black people are asking for in the world is to be treated equitably. So I'm happy that, there is some change for the brands that are genuinely committed to changing. But at the same time, I would be lying if I said that I'm not resentful that it seems like a lot of brands and a lot of people are now finding out that Black people exist.
Welcome to Anatomy of a Strategy. I'm Stephanie Forster.
And I'm Tara Hunt.
And if you're new here, Anatomy of a Strategy explores the hidden psychology and behaviors that drive marketing strategies.
This is the third official episode in a mini-series we're calling The Anatomy of White Supremacy in Marketing, where we're looking at the ways in which marketing practices, institutions, and systems contribute to anti-Black racism and perpetuating of white supremacy.
In our last episode, we spoke with Ian Forster, no relation to myself, who is a senior Firestarter producer at the BBC and a complete data nerd. And we talked a lot about data ethics and how data can be manipulated and used against Black people and encourage racist practices. But also, on the flip side, how owning your own data can be really powerful, like using Google as an alibi.
Yeah, that was so fascinating. Mm-hmm. So in this episode, we're talking to Danica Nelson. She's worked at a telecommunications firm as a senior marketing and communications manager for over a decade. She's also a public speaker and a DEI advocate. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So safe to say she's got a lot on her plate.
Right. It's hard to advocate for change and fight for more representation in the marketing industry while also doing a full-time senior job. But we know representation in marketing is really important, and there are really not a whole lot of Black people in marketing, especially in senior roles.
Definitely. And we talk about a few really crucial topics. One is some of the change she's hoping to see in the marketing industry with performativeship and hiring practices.
Yeah, and also the burnout she experienced just trying to fight for systemic change while wearing so many hats, and how it led her to take a break and go travel the world until, of course, her trip was cut short by COVID.
COVID has interrupted so much this year.
I know, but I love how she described her travel experience. I mean, she had fascinating insights into how traveling was very different for her as a Black woman.
Yeah, and also we talked to her about how important it is to have that representation. As we've noticed in past episodes, there is only single-digit percentages of Black leadership represented in the marketing world. I think it was like 1.9% or something crazy. And I really love the way she described the first time she saw Bozoma St. John. I felt like I was in the room with her in that moment.
Me too. Yeah. So let's get into it then.
Let's.
So we are really excited, Steph, today to have Danica on Anatomy of a Strategy. Welcome. Danica.
Thank you for having me.
I have been in awe of everything that you do. Not only are you super influential in the Canadian marketing scene, but you up and did something that most of us dream about. You said, okay, I'm off. I'm going and I'm going to travel around the world, and super envious. But you're back because of COVID.
Unfortunately, COVID sent my ass home early.
But for anybody who's listening that may not already follow you on the various social platforms, please do describe who you are, what you do, your background, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Danica Nelson. My pronouns are she and her. I'm currently employed at TELUS, which is one of Canada's largest telecommunications companies, for anyone who doesn't know. It'll be 12 years next year that I've been employed with TELUS for. So a very, very long time. And I started my TELUS journey in 2008 when it was right after high school. And I was kind of just saving money to put myself through university. So since then, I've really kind of climbed the corporate ladder to get to where I am today. I started interning at TELUS within my last semester of university. and have been through all the different roles. And like I said, now my title is currently a Senior Marketing Communications Manager. So really proud of that. And I'm also a diversity, equity, and inclusion advocate / champion. And I kind of fell more into that space when I started climbing that corporate ladder and I stopped seeing people who look like me. Representation, I think, is super important, especially for Black people within the marketing industry where there are very few of us. And once I stopped seeing people who look like me, I really started diving deeper in diversity, equity, inclusion, and seeing how I can change that, how I can influence more young Black people to get in the industry, and how I can just really incite some positive long-term change within the Canadian marketing industry. So that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that work that you've been doing for a long time now has become extra relevant now. You must be kind of like in demand at this point.
It's interesting because, like you said, I've been doing the work for quite some time now, and as of the last 2 months, since like June 2020, things have just been blown up massively, and there's been a lot of people reaching out to do diversity, equity, inclusion workshops. They're looking for practitioners. So I have been quite busy, trying to influence and try to really just incite some positive change, of course, while also trying to process all these awful things that are happening and have been viewed in the media, and just really trying to make some change. So it has been a very busy and overwhelming last couple months.
I don't mind jumping into the performative part, like right off the top here, because that is there's a big conversation in and around that, right? I've heard from some people that it is, they see the Black squares on Instagram. It's like the big kind of obvious performance. It didn't take very much. Literally, you could just like put your finger over your camera lens, post it, and like that's action. And so that's been called out. But then there are several people, of course, that have said, wait. It's at least there's a start. There's a raising of awareness, and it's if it goes beyond that Black square, at least like it kicked off something good. What camp are you in when it comes to that opinion?
I'm kind of mixed emotions on that, because realistically, like, we want change. All we're asking for is equity. All Black people are asking for in the world is to be treated equitably. So I'm happy that, there is some change for the brands that are genuinely committed to changing. But at the same time, I would be lying if I said that I'm not resentful that it seems like a lot of brands and a lot of people are now finding out that Black people exist. Like, it honestly feels like Black people are like a newly released thing into this universe. And we've been here. We have been continuously over decades and centuries communicating the inequities that we face. And it just seems like now, as a result of like the George Floyd murder being put on a broader scale, that now people are starting to pay attention. So I think it's definitely easy now, though, to spot like the performative brand. Because if you look at that Black square, if you look before the Black square, were any Black faces posted on that feed at all? Were any Black voices amplified? And even following that Black square, you can see like maybe close to it, there's a few Black faces, but already it's slowly starting to dissipate. I think that's how I'm really being able to spot who's being performative and who's actually dedicated to long-term change. And it's been very overwhelming because, everyone on a grand scale, we're all experiencing COVID, and most of us have only, experienced this pandemic for the first time in our lives. And it's even more overwhelming for a lot of like my Black peers and myself, for example, where we're the only Black person that a lot of our white friends know. And, with that comes a lot of people, a lot of white friends or just non-Black friends reaching out saying, hey, how can I help? Or, almost kind of guilt tripping and, saying sorry for things that they didn't actually do. And it's just been a very, very overwhelming time. But I think to go back to our conversation on, how organizations need to kind of keep up this change, I've been saying consistently that organizations need to be treating diversity, equity, and inclusion the same way that they would a business objective. There needs to be a KPI associated with it. There needs to be a budget associated with it. And like you said, regular check-ins. You wouldn't treat the launch of a new project or a new product like we'll see how it happens. Maybe we'll get there, maybe we don't. You would treat it like a business objective, like it was going to, drive some income or some revenue to your business. And I think that to take this seriously, leaders truly need to believe in this, and they absolutely need to treat it like a business objective.
Mm-hmm. And being in the tech space, especially, like I know you're in marketing the tech space, but you're in tech nonetheless. Is that especially kind of challenging because you're a woman, you're a Black woman, and you're working in tech, which is full of not people who look like you at all, right?
Yeah, exactly. When I say that I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion advocate / champion, I really focus my emphasis on intersectionality. And intersectionality is kind of the term that we use to analyze all the different intersections of marginalization that a person would face. So, for example, there's race, religion, socioeconomical status, education, immigration status. There's a lot of different things that people face that push them closer to those margins. And being a Black woman in tech is pushing me quite far to the margins. So I think there are quite a few challenges that people like me overcome. And with that being said, I even have some privileges that I must fully acknowledge, because though I'm a Black woman, I'm a fair-skinned Black woman. And I know that darker-skinned Black women, as a result of colorism, have a lot more issues in the workplace that they need to face. I'm cisgendered. That's another one of my privileges. I'm heterosexual. That's another one of my privileges. So I acknowledge that I do benefit from some privilege. But again, from an intersectional lens, there's so many different things that people experience that make life working in tech, or just life period, significantly more difficult.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's important to understand intersectionality. But one of the arguments I think that's always come up, and just recently I had a conversation with my parents who are in Alberta, and my dad said, well, Indigenous people in this country get treated a lot worse. And I said, Dad, it's not a competition, and that's not what the conversation is about right now. So it's really great that you're acknowledging like the privilege that you have, but the conversation right now, and I think I've heard it so many times from white people, that they like derail it and what about this? What about that? And I'm like, let's stick to the conversation we're having here right now.
Yeah, I think the underlying thing here is that we should be, acknowledging our privileges and giving everyone a seat at the table, no matter what they experience, no matter, what their backgrounds are. They need to be, given a seat and given an opportunity for their voice to be amplified.
Yeah, I think in what I find in technology, and you probably have a much sharper experience with this, is when you come to those tables, there's a lot of the same person around that table, and everybody will say, oh, it's meritocracy, like everybody worked hard to get there. But when you look at it, we all know that there's much more qualified people than who got to that table, and because of the privilege of the people at that table, they got sort of a leg up to get there. I'm thinking of a work, actually, I don't know if you've come across this book by Dr. Thomas Chamorro. Basically, his thesis is, why do mediocre white men get promoted so frequently? And everybody else has to be 10 times better in order to just beat like the mediocre white guy in the room.
Yeah, there's a saying that goes, carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white man. And it's controversial, but at the same time, I really kind of drill that in my head, because mediocre white men, they have these growth and abundance mindsets. They don't think in terms of limits. they've been conditioned to, a lot of them have been conditioned to believe that they can get whatever they want. And a lot of women like me, for example, Black women, we really do feel like we need to work, twice as hard and be twice as good to enjoy the same things that a mediocre white man would. So
I think it's the reality, though. The unfortunate reality is that already, and we were speaking with Cher Jones, and she was, mentioning this, is she walks in the room, she already has barriers that she needs to unlearn, like unteach people in the room that she is, super smart and competent before she even gets to say her piece. Whereas like the white dude walks in the room and he just goes and says his piece.
Yeah, unconscious bias plays such a huge role in so many aspects of our lives, but especially the professional world. And yeah, even like myself as example, I know that when I walk into a room and I have big hair and I'm a Black woman, and I know that if I pipe up against something or if I don't believe in something, I'm often seen as an aggressive Black woman, where I'm just being an assertive Black woman. So a lot of people, really need to take these things into account and really acknowledge and unlearn their unconscious bias to make that shift in professional and personal spaces.
You work to lift while you climb, which I love. I love that sentence. I just think it's such a great turn of phrase. But what does that mean to you exactly in your particular fields? Because it says, you're an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. But lifting while you climb, how do you sort of go about doing that particular thing?
Yeah, I think there's two pieces to that. One thing that I mentioned earlier is representation is so important to me. And I think it's really important for younger Black women or, younger Black Indigenous people of color to see, these types of people in places of power, being interviewed on podcasts, being on panels, and just really seeing that what they want to do is possible, because that seeing turns into believing. I know for me, I discovered someone named Bozoma St. John in 2016. Are you familiar with Bozoma St. John by any chance?
Oh yeah, she just got a big, amazing new job title too, which is well deserved. I'm so that's so cool.
Yeah. So for background, for anyone who doesn't know who she is a executive, a Black woman within the marketing industry. She's been predominantly within tech companies. She used to work for Apple, Endeavor, and now she's at Netflix. She just started at Netflix a couple of weeks ago. But I discovered her when she was working at Apple at one of their announcements where, they unleashed their new products. And I will never forget that day, because I was watching it, and that was the first time in my life and in my career that I saw a Black woman who was unapologetically Black, walked on stage dancing to music. She had, big, beautiful hair. She had a bright pink dress, and she really wasn't making herself smaller to fit into a traditionally white space, because these Apple performances and Unleashed ceremonies are typically very white. And I remember when I saw that, I just started believing oh my gosh, I can be unapologetically Black, and I can be, C-suite level or, executive level within the marketing industry. And that really flicked a switch in my head. Since then, I've had a picture of her on my vision board where she has really long box braids and traditional West African, kente type material. And it would just always reminds me that I don't need to make myself smaller to fit in those spaces. And, since that has happened, I have, shown up to all spaces being my true self. I don't feel the need that I have to straighten my hair or, make it blonde or super light to fit in the space anymore. And I think by doing that, I'm encouraging other Black women who are also aspiring to be in the marketing industry, letting them know that you can be yourself and you don't need to assimilate or quote unquote whiten yourself to fit in these spaces. So I think the representation thing has really been a huge way that I believe in lifting while I climb. And also, I recently just started this. I open up my calendar every Tuesday evening for Black, Indigenous, people of color within the marketing, advertising and communications industry in Canada. And I just answer any questions that they have or, try to support them in their career growth. And, even that has been super rewarding, just to, really understand a lot of the challenges that they're facing and kind of give them that advice that I understand that things are difficult. You don't see a lot of people who look like you, but just keep pushing. And like, if you're dedicated to this, you can actually, make it to get to where you want to be.
Yeah. Okay. I love it. And let's just add this up. You are a strategic communicator, like that's full-time job. You do the DEI stuff, that's like pretty much full-time job. You're also lifting other people up, which is also a full-time job. You've got to be a little tired at this point. There's no such thing as meritocracy in this current world that we live in. I'm trying to imagine what that would look like, even if it's just in our industry. Have you, I'm sure you have thoughts on that side. Like, what would that look like if you could imagine not having to lift while you climb?
It's funny you asked me that, and I can't even imagine it. I think I've just been so drenched in reality for women like me that I actually cannot imagine a world where, we wouldn't have to lift while we climb and we wouldn't have to help each other. I mean, this is what I'm striving towards. I would like a fully diverse, inclusive, and equitable world, but I can't imagine it yet. I can't imagine a fully DEI world, which is pretty sad when you think of it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's also I don't like that the onus is you have to lift. It's like with women, it's help other women and make sure other women can also raise through the ranks and become as successful as you are. It's okay, but why aren't men responsible for any of this? Why is it us who have to do that? And not that isn't valuable work, and that I don't feel like women should be supporting other women, because they do, and I absolutely try to do that in my life as well. But I feel like there's a bit of a dance around the real problem, which is that, we have to kind of bear the weight of raising everything up. What are your thoughts about that kind of?
Yeah, it definitely shouldn't be that way. And like you said, it shouldn't kind of all fall on Black, Indigenous, people of color, or people who are kind of more on those intersections of marginalization. It really shouldn't fall on us. But unfortunately, that's our current reality. I am hopeful that as a result of the last 2 months, things are changing. Specifically, maybe I'm speaking to gender issues. Men are kind of seeing where they need to step up and seeing that it's not just on women to solve things. Non-Black, Indigenous, people of color are also seeing that, okay, it's not just on us. We need help. We need help from our white allies as well. And in all of the other intersections of marginalization, I think that we're just really starting to see that we all kind of need to work together to move the world and to actually make a difference and incite long-term positive change.
Whew, what an episode this is turning out to be, huh? The Anatomy of a Strategy podcast is just a sneak peek of the marketing insights available to you on Flywheel. Get marketing agency level expertise without the marketing agency price. Try your first week free. Go to flywheel.com. That's Flywheel with a PHLYWHEEL.
What do you think, though, on that side? If we were to, because the audience for this podcast, I would say, is primarily white. So this is why we're using this podcast to get that out. Because we know that the people that are listening are going to say, great, okay. Because, I assume if they're already listening to Stef and I, we tend to, we're white ladies, but we're not white men. And we tend to be pretty feminist. We want to be able to incite some action. And I think, that's what we want to get out of this. Do you have thoughts on what some of those actions could be?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been seeing this quote kind of surfacing on social media that says silence is violence. And I really like that, because I think a lot of people now are realizing that it's not enough to just be not racist. We really need to be anti-racist. And when you see injustices, again, so if we're going to speak to color and race, for example, right now, if you see injustices against Black, Indigenous, people of color, you need to actively call people out. It shouldn't fall on, the Black, Indigenous people of color to, either just kind of let these microaggressions, pass us by and kind of just brush them off our shoulder. We really do need white people, to be a true ally and help call some of these things out. And there's so many more things that, in terms of like actions for, the marketing Canadian industry, that I think that we can make. For example, Strategy Magazine released an article a couple weeks ago with some pretty interesting stats. One of them was 74% of staff at agencies in Toronto are white, despite representing only 48% of the city's population. And in contrast to that, 3% of staff are Black, despite representing 8% of the city's population. So that in itself, there's clearly a Black representation issue in the client side and agency side marketing industries. And I think that, change really starts from within our workplaces. We need to be retaining more Black talent. We need to be retaining more Indigenous talent to really, and people of color talent, to really shift the way that the marketing industry is, experienced and viewed by, Canada's general population. And like I said earlier, I think a lot of these brands and companies are only now realizing that, oh crap, we have some issues. There's actually no Black people on our team. And I've actually spoke to a few, founders and executive level people who've reached out to me in confidence saying, I feel really bad. I only now realize that I don't have any Black people on my team. And that's really alarming to me because, like I said, people like me who've been in this space for a few years, who've been highlighting these issues for years, was I doing that for no reason? Was I just not being heard? Was I silent? It's just really, really frustrating. So yeah, I think it's kind of different for everyone, but it's just media and marketing is just not an industry that is consistently, suggested to us. And also we don't see a lot of people who look like us in those industries. Media, for example, you'll see like TV shows, and traditionally you'll see like maybe one Black host. And there's also kind of that underlying message that is like, okay, there's only room for very few of us at the table. So is this really a table that I want to target, or should I just choose another table?
Yeah. Well, and also I think to note, not everybody that's in marketing has an education background in marketing. Stephanie and I have women's studies degrees. So
I didn't go to school for marketing either. Like I said, I went to school for media. I went to school for marketing like later down the line, but marketing is a cool art where you can really teach yourself along the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you mentioned like media and marketing, these two industries that don't have a lot of representation, but like media is literally what we see and hear all the time. And marketing is like the messages that are being pushed to us every day. So if there's no representation in these two huge industries that influence how we see the world, that's a big, big problem. So I'm trying to figure out how we can fix the problem in media and in marketing when the representation problem is still there. And that's something that we're still trying to grapple with.
Yeah, I think even like, as was said earlier, a lot of hiring managers in these places who, are able to make some change, they'll say, oh, well, there are not enough Black people, applying, or, oh, this person was just more qualified. I think that there are so many directories available on the internet. LinkedIn is a thing. There are so many ways that you can intentionally, do that outreach to find Black talent. And a lot of companies just aren't doing it. And what's even more mind-boggling to me is after, these last 2 months, I've heard stories of companies who've previously rejected Black candidates now calling them back and saying, hey, maybe you want to go through this interview process again. We said you weren't a good fit before, but maybe you should try again. And to me, that is just mind-blowing that, you previously wrote someone off, said they weren't a good fit, but now you're looking for that Black representation. It's very frustrating.
Then it does fall into the, quota filling category. And, back to when we were chatting with Cher, she was saying that the second sort of hurdle to get over is now you're in the room, you're at the table, you've got the job, and everybody around you is like, she got it because they're filling a quota. And that once again undermines the talent and potential of that person again.
Exactly. We're not just asking to be hired because we're Black. Like, hire us because we're Black, but also primarily because we're good at what we do. Yeah. And also, a lot of these companies now are approaching Black people to focus their work specifically on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But we're talented. Like, Black people are not, or Black Indigenous people of color don't need to, specifically hone their skills in on DEI. We have, multifaceted, multi-talents, and we're good at many different things. And we don't just need to speak on racial injustices.
You do 3 jobs and you do them amazingly well. Like, not only amazingly well, you've become an influencer in all those 3 areas. Like, if that isn't enough, like, what the hell?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm fortunate in the sense that I have a lot of energy to pursue those things. But at the same time, I always remind my Black, Indigenous, people of color peers that they don't have to do all these things. You don't need to consistently speak up against racial injustices. You don't need to be on your DEI committees and, talking to people about it. Like, it's totally okay to just exist and just listen and kind of process these things as well. So, and especially for, maybe all the white leaders who are listening who right now maybe only have one or very few Black employees. No Black employee wants to feel like they have to be the voice of their people and really just be like the spokesperson, because that gets very overwhelming. Also, sometimes it's very difficult to separate your emotions from what's happening, and your livelihood is at stake, right? Like, this is your job. This is how you're putting food on the table. It's how you're making your money. And sometimes it's very difficult to tell leaders like, hey, I think you were wrong about this, because we want to keep our jobs. So I think creating a safe space and, creating that relationships with your team, especially your Black team members, to let them know that it's okay. Whatever you want to feel right now, that's okay. I would start with that. And then also, I do think that addressing it and speaking up against it and, stating, what you're doing to kind of, unlearn and do better, I think that's really important. I spoke to a lot of people and peers within my network during those, especially the first initial weeks. And a lot of leaders didn't say anything at all. And they were completely silent. And as I kind of stated earlier, silence is violence. Like, it sounds like you don't care. There's everything going on in the industry. Brands are releasing these statements, and there's just so much going on. But when you don't hear from your leaders acknowledging this at all, it's awful. Like, it feels like, you're invisible. It feels like they don't care. And it feels like, maybe my values don't align with this brand anymore. And that's what a lot of, Black employees had said during those 2 weeks. So I do think that it's important to speak up against it, and speak, how your thoughts on it and how you are committing to long-term positive change. But of course, the timing is also important. Understand that your Black employees are processing a lot of what's going on. So, you don't want to put them on the spot and allow them to just feel.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't make it their burden to to help you feel like you're doing okay.
Yeah. And that happens a lot. Like I said, I am the only Black person that a lot of my white peers know. And I got a lot of, hey, am I doing this right? Like, what types of resources should I read? Or, what books should I read? What should I do? And that is extremely overwhelming, in addition to the processing of what's happening across the world for people who look like you. So I think just being mindful of that is very important.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, it's really great advice. So you mentioned a little bit earlier, and I want to kind of dig into it a little bit. The idea of being yourself in your environment, and I guess like what's referred to as code switching, right? Having to perform whiteness, I guess, to fit in. And this is like a topic that's really interesting to me, because I love the idea of throwing out all of the things that we have spent so many years, like those tropes of business, of marketing, the white guy with the turtleneck is like the creative director kind of thing. How damaging is code switching at the end of the day for a creative?
It's
going
very
into those.
damaging. Sometimes I listen to because I do code switch sometimes. Sometimes I do it unconsciously because it is something that you need to unlearn. And, sometimes I listen to myself when I code switch and I'm like, who is that? Like, sometimes I scare my own self at my code switching. And unfortunately, that's just something that we've been taught, especially from myself coming from an immigrant background. Both of my parents are Jamaican. Assimilation is kind of just the unsaid rule that you really do need to whiten yourself to fit in these spaces. So if you look at my professional headshots from early in my career compared to now, there's such a drastic difference. I started my career with like straight like blonde hair extensions, dressing like very like black and white, very businessy, and really not myself to fit in these spaces. And because I thought that's how I needed to look and that's how I needed to act to kind of climb that ladder. But after I discovered Bozoma St. John, to what I said earlier, like me having my hair big and curly, that was an act of rebellion. Me having a hot pink background in my professional headshots in my company, that is a corporation. It's an act of rebellion. But I think, again, it's important for people to see that and just be reminded that you can be yourself. And especially in marketing, which is meant to be a creative industry, you can totally be yourself and be successful.
Yeah, well, and a lot of creativity is about having the space to explore. And if you're like constrained, I guess, like that's going to limit.
Absolutely. And to what you said earlier, like it's incredibly damaging where your self-talk to yourself is that you cannot be yourself to be successful. To really maintain this voice that's not yours to be successful, that absolutely gets exhausting after a while. You're working your regular job, but you're working two jobs to try to do your job well, but do it as someone else. And that's not how it should be in any industry, and especially in a creative industry.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the instance, you're doing 4 jobs of what I just...
Yeah, I think it goes back to this idea that, when we think of professional, that comes with all sorts of weird white overtures with it. Like, you're not professional unless you're in like a white person's suit, and you're not professional unless you have white people hair. So like, how do we combat this idea of professionalism? I mean, it's important to be professional, but I think that there's a lot of constructs around the idea of or is it? I don't know. I think there's a lot of weird constructs around professional that we don't unpack enough. And how do we kind of get over that and understand that there's different ways to be professional, whatever that means?
That's a very complicated response, I think. It's so deeply rooted that, whiteness is professional. I remember in early June, it went viral where when you actually Google white professional hairstyle, when you Google professional hairstyles, you see all white men who kind of have like these buzz cuts and, your traditional white men haircut. And when you Google unprofessional hairstyles, you see women like me. You see women with afros, you see women with braids. It is so deeply rooted in just our planet that there's just so much work to be done to really unlearn that. And, I think that, first of all, people like me kind of being rebellious to that and showing you that I can have this big hair, I can show up in a pink background, I can show up in bright colors, and I'm still damn good at my job. I think that is one way to do it. But also, I think that, we need to stop these microaggressions for when people like me in the workplace show up dressed the way I am. Those comments are like, oh, well, that's an interesting outfit choice. Or, oh, wow, your hair looks really big. Like, do you wash it? Can you comb it? Things like that are things that, first of all, people need to not say. And second of all, people who are privy to those conversations and exposed to those conversations need to call out. And not necessarily, again, just Black, Indigenous people of color, but other people who witness that, white people, need to say that is inappropriate. You can't say that.
Yeah. But I like the idea of like throwing out what professional means and redefining it. I mean, why isn't professional why isn't Bozoma St. John like the epitome of, for me, she is. I think she's just looking at her, I would aspire to be that professional. I would not aspire to be like that stiff dude in with a buzz cut and a suit and tie that's like blue and white or whatever. Like, I totally wouldn't want to aspire to that. So why not?
I think the current definition of professionalism is like deeply rooted in like history. Of course, with like slavery, Black people in their traditional natural features have always just been, considered less than and less worthy. And there's just a lot of unlearning that I think the entire planet needs to do. Even I need to do sometimes to feel like this is okay. I can do this. I can be myself, and that is professional.
Yeah. Well, and I think as you mentioned, and in back to Bozma, like representation is really, really important. And that's part of unlearning, seeing more, more Black women, more Black men, more Indigenous leaders like represented at the top. And that helps us redefine what professional looks like, right?
Totally.
Exactly.
It's a really good
At the
point.
end of the day.
Imagine if half of all the CEOs were like Black women. Professional would be a lot more.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, I also think business would run a lot better, but that's just
true.
That's a whole that's my bias that I really think when I take a look at my Black female friends and colleagues and everything that you do to like how creative you have to be, how strategic, how just fully hardworking, all the stuff that's in there. I think, just everybody just move over because, when you have to fight that hard all your life, you make an amazing leader, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that it shouldn't have to be that way.
No.
I think Black women, are often defined as like being strong and resilient. And we do that because we have to. We literally have to survive. But we're tired. Like a lot of us are exhausted. And earlier you mentioned, kind of this worldwide trip that I went on last year. Yeah, so I called that my Liberty Leave. And basically, I define a Liberty Leave as a purposeful pause, plan, and pivot, and the intentional act of leaving behind what doesn't bring you liberty for what does. So I always wanted to go on a long-term trip. I wasn't able to afford it when I first graduated from university. And also, I got hired straight out of university. And also, I was really, really tired last year. And going back to our point of, Black women specifically often feeling like we have to work twice as hard and be twice as good, that comes with a lot of different issues. It comes with like health issues, the emotional taxes that we need to face, and also just burnout. And honestly, I was really, really burnt out last year. And I knew that I was kind of coming to that point because I had planned my Liberty Leave at least a year in advance. I started planning for it. But yeah, I think, in combination with, of course, me wanting to travel, but me being very tired and really needing to take a step back and reanalyze what's important to me and where I need to continue driving my energy.
How was it incredibly rejuvenating? Did it fill you up again? I know it was cut short.
Yeah, it was cut short by only about a month because of COVID. I came home literally a week before COVID was declared a pandemic. So I'm really glad I came home. But it was really important for me to do that. And it just gave me a completely different perspective on life. It gave me a different perspective on like what normal is, what it means to be professional. I met these people who are digital nomads. So they literally work from their laptops and they just country hop every month, and that's their life. And what's normal to them is living out of a suitcase. And I think that perspective was really important to me. And yeah, I was able to do 2 months in Thailand, 1 month in Vietnam, a week in Singapore, 2 weeks in Bali, and 3 weeks in Philippines. And it was amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And that's interesting because like you're traveling as a Black woman in some of those countries are not super friendly to Black people. What was your experience traveling there?
Yeah, actually, as a marketer traveling, I found it even more interesting that in every single country that I just mentioned, I was reminded through advertising that my skin color was not preferred. in every single country, they sell this product called like Fair and White, for example, where it's meant to lighten your skin.
Mm-hmm.
It was so difficult for me to find even just like moisturizers, like lotions for my skin or deodorant that didn't have bleaching agents in it. And just colorism was just so very real to me there, but in a much more in your face way than it is in North America. And that was really, really eye-opening to me. So, just seeing that in the stores and on the advertisements that you would only see the lightest of the light, even of their people represented in their ads, but also, just the way that I was treated compared to some of my other white peers was very apparent. And yeah, I think I was kind of able to make the most of it and kind of try to not pay attention to it, but it was still very apparent that, Black travelers have a significantly different experience than our white counterparts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I watched a program a little while back where the organizer, there was like a travel company, and they specifically created travel experiences for Black people because they were able to create a safe space to really just enjoy the travel. And I remember like somebody on the program being like, well, why would you that's discriminate, like the reverse racism thing. And it made total sense when they were describing the experience, especially of traveling while Black in like Asia and other places where it's not, it's not very friendly. Yeah.
Yeah. Even like a lot of my friends said that to me, like, you're really going to go and you're not going to straighten your hair and you're just going to, you're going to stand out like that. And I'm like, you know what? I think I want to live my unapologetic Black truth in both my professional life and in my personal life. And I made it work. And I'm really proud of that.
I love what she says about living her unapologetic truth.
Me too. Hopefully she can get back on a plane and continue her adventures soon, crossing our fingers. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know about you, but I'd love to hear more about her experiences abroad as well.
Yeah, definitely. And who knows, man, maybe when the pandemic is over and we're on the other side of all this, travel might look completely different. And that may or may not necessarily be a bad thing.
Yeah, the world will no doubt be a very different place after the pandemic. But based on these conversations, I'm hoping there'll be more room for personal creativity and expression in the professional world as well.
Mm-hmm. And the Black Lives Matter movement is really bringing a lot of these issues to the forefront. But overall, I think people are just tired of the idea that there's only one way to be seen as professional or be taken seriously.
Viva la revolution, Stef.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Danica, for joining us. You can follow Danica at Danica S. Nelson. That's DANICAS, as in Sam, Nelson, NELSON, on Twitter, or check out her website at watchdanicawork.com.
And join us in a few weeks when our guest Nate Nichols, the founder and creative director of Palette Group, and also the co-founder of Allyship in Action, will be on the podcast. And he'll be talking about bringing authenticity back into marketing.
I'm so excited for people to hear this interview too. Nate is a force of nature.
He really is, yeah.
Thank you also to our content manager, Amos Amal, our audio engineer and editor, Joe Pacheco, and our incredible staff at Truly Inc. and Flywheel, who help these stories come alive. The show is written and hosted by Stephanie Forrester and me, Tara Hunt.
And if you enjoyed this episode, there are many, many more to come. So please also let us know what you think. If we missed any criticisms, comments, bring it on. We want to hear from you. So subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Send us your feedback, ideas, suggestions, even your complaints on Twitter. We have thick skin. The podcast is found at Anatomy of a Strat, and I'm found at Stephanie F, STEFANIF.
And I'm found at Miss Rogue, MISSROGUE. Also, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps us get found.
And share with your friends, colleagues, boss, family, anyone who you think will benefit from listening.
See you soon.
Stay safe. Bye.
This episode was sponsored by home insurance special... Just joking. You know who it is. Flywheel, a DIY marketing community that gives you all the support, resources, and direction you'll ever need. Go to flywheel.com to join and get your first week free.